Hello, listeners! Welcome to Stars of the Golden Age, a show that highlights the lives of legends from film, music, and the birth of television during Hollywood's golden age and the few years surrounding it. I am your host, Erin Carlson. Today, we will be discussing Grace Kelly, who went from Hollywood royalty to actual royalty during her lifetime. Grace Kelly was born in Philadelphia on November 12, 1929, to conservative Irish Catholic parents, Jack and Margaret Kelly. Jack and Margaret are real treats of humans, you will soon find out. The prominent family lived in a 17-room mansion in the affluent suburb of Germantown, so Grace was born into a life of privilege. She had 3 siblings, all who were more outgoing like their father, but Grace was more reserved and quiet, and she preferred the arts and literature to the more outgoing activities that the rest of her family seemed to enjoy. This difference in disposition made her feel a little outcasted and left behind in her early family life, and she felt like she was always seeking their approval, a feeling that would stick with her well into adulthood. Grace had some family influence in the performing arts in her uncle George Kelly, a Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright, as well as her uncle Walter Kelly, a vaudevillian performer. So she definitely admired and looked up to them, and her uncle George became her biggest supporter and mentor through her rise to fame. When Grace was 12 years old, she joined a local community theater group, and she officially became a budding actress. She continued to take on roles throughout her teenage years. After she graduated from high school, she said to her mother, "Now I'm really going to do what I've always wanted to do." Grace Kelly was ready to become a star. Her mother, not so much. After high school, in summer of 1947, Grace was accepted into the prestigious American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York City. This was a huge cultural leap for the reserved and protected little girl from an affluent Pennsylvania community. Her parents arranged for her to live in a home for young women called the Barbizon Hotel for Women. These kinds of lodging establishments had very strict rules for the young women to follow. But as Grace matured into early adulthood and the freedom from her upbringing, she began to discover her wild side. She was very careful to maintain her good girl image when it was appropriate to do so, but behind closed doors, she was getting a little wild and frisky. There is one story from her early days in New York when she had a few drinks at a party, and before long she had jumped up onto the table and was seductively dancing to the music. She sounds kind of fun, but this kind of behavior was not common in prim and proper post-war society. She also used to successfully sneak her boyfriend Herb into the girls' home without the matron mothers ever knowing. She must have been good. Grace did well in her studies at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. They offered voice refining lessons, and Grace took her speech lessons very seriously. She wanted to smooth out her East Coast accent into a more polished speaking voice. Her family barely recognized her sound when she came back home, and of course, they poked a little fun at her. But she was determined to take her acting aspirations very seriously, so she did not let them bring her down too much. One weekend during her academy days, she accompanied her boyfriend Herb to a weekend gathering of one of his friends who was a photographer. This photographer friend loved what he saw in Grace and wanted to photograph her. This step into the modeling world quickly launched her onto the cover of Redbook magazine, Cosmopolitan magazine, and ads for Old Gold cigarettes. She was quickly making $7.50 per hour modeling. That was pretty good money for 1948. Today, that would adjust to a little under $100 an hour, and she was only 19 years old. Not too shabby, Grace. Her quick success made some of her classmates at the academy pretty jealous, and they sometimes took out their bitterness through cruel behavior. A staff member at the academy, 27-year-old Dawn Richardson, stepped in to protect Grace during one incident. Within 2 hours, they would wind up in bed together, and a romantic relationship would blossom from there. Grace's poor boyfriend Herb had been replaced. Poor Herb. It sounds like the relationship began pretty casual, but before too long, Grace was talking wedding bells with Dawn. Grace brought Dawn home to meet her family, and they were extremely rude and disrespectful to both Dawn and Grace. Grace's brothers reportedly made anti-Semitic comments and jokes right in front of Dawn, knowing well his Jewish roots. Grace's parents pretty much forbade her from marrying Dawn, who they did not see fit for their family's social class. Rude. Little did they know, though, Dawn would go on to have a highly successful directing career. Their loss, I guess. Grace's parents also criticized her dreams every chance they could. They considered her dreams of becoming a successful actress to be silly, unrealistic, and a childish fantasy. They had zero faith in her and offered her no encouragement at all. This kind of treatment from her family would make her have to use even more of her internal determination to obtain her goals. But there would always be a part of her that would want to please her parents. It's really sad. Grace graduated from the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York at the age of 19. Upon graduation, Grace's parents ordered her to end things with Dawn and move out of the city and into the family's summer home in Ocean City, New Jersey. I mean, that does sound pretty sweet, but they can't really be telling her what to do anymore. She did what she was told, though, still not completely able to disobey her parents. Poor Dawn, he didn't even see it coming. He was heartbroken. After a summer in New Jersey, Grace decided she would try to go against her strict parents' rules once again and move back to New York. Dawn was ecstatic to have her back, but quickly saddened when he realized she was also dating other men. This time became a time of real sexual experimentation for Grace as she was trying to find herself. While back in New York, she tried getting her feet onto the stage life of Broadway, but it didn't go as well as she had hoped. She had beauty, style, and grace, but she was lacking the voice power needed to be highly successful on the stage. However, at an audition, a cartoonist named Al Capp promised Grace a great chance of a role in his musical adaptation of Little Abner. All she had to do was have sex with him. She, of course, rejected his offer, but Al responded by attempting to rape Grace. Unfortunately, this kind of behavior was not uncommon during that time, and women usually remained silent about these incidents because it would likely end up harming their reputation and ruining their careers. It's horrible. Grace left that audition with ripped clothing and tousled hair, but she had not lost faith in her dreams. Soon after, Grace returned to Pennsylvania and did stage work for a local production company. The first play she appeared in with the company was one that had been written by her uncle George called The Torchbearers. Her performance was well received, and she soon had the confidence she needed to return to Broadway. It was the fall of 1949, and it was time to try again for 20-year-old Grace Kelly. Grace landed a role in the successful Broadway show The Father, and she received stunning reviews. Many even said that she was the best part of the entire show. People were starting to take notice of newcomer Grace Kelly. Luckily for Grace, the post-World War II era was a booming time for television and movies. She made the decision to relocate to Hollywood in early 1950. The next couple of years were very busy for Grace, as she appeared in more than 60 primetime television show appearances, including Hallmark Hall of Fame, Studio One, and The Ed Sullivan Show. This small screen recognition helped boost her leap into the big screen as talent scouts began to take notice. Grace's first movie role was a film called 14 Hours. It ended up being somewhat of a flop, but she now had her toes in the Hollywood movie waters and she was thirsty for more. That summer, Grace was given the starring role opposite Gary Cooper in High Noon. Grace, who was always drawn to older men, we could really dig into that, was mesmerized by Gary Cooper's charm, and an intimate romance quickly began. Gary definitely fit the criteria for an older man. He was 28 years older than Grace. Grace was happy. Gary was probably for sure happy. I'm happy for them. But you know who was not happy? Grace's parents, when they learned of the relationship through the gossip tabloids. In fact, Grace's mother, Margaret, was so upset, she hopped on a plane immediately to control the situation. Oof, time to cut the umbilical cord, Margaret. Jeez. Well, Margaret's meddling apparently worked because Gary Cooper stepped out of Grace's life. But even though the relationship did not last, High Noon was a box office hit. Grace Kelly was now a Hollywood star. She co-starred with legends Clark Gable and Ava Gardner in her next movie, 1953's Mogambo. When she met 51-year-old Clark Gable, I think you can see where this is going, she knew she had to have him. He was quite a hottie, if I do say so. However, Clark was not really interested in dating a woman 30 years younger than him. Good job, Clark. So he rebuked her advances. And guess what? Grace was not used to that kind of rejection from a man and was really upset at the time. Hopefully, the success of the movie helped her feel a little better, though, because it was a smash hit. Many people know Grace Kelly from her film collaborations with legendary director Alfred Hitchcock. He saw something unique and special in Grace and is quoted as saying, quote, "An actress like Grace, who is a real lady, gives a director certain advantages. He can afford to be more colorful with a love scene played by a lady than one played by a hussy. With a hussy, such a scene can be vulgar, but if you put a lady in the same circumstances, she's exciting and glamorous," end quote. That Al didn't tiptoe around his words, did he? Alfred Hitchcock and Grace Kelly worked on 3 successful movies together, the most famous being 1954's Rear Window, the film that catapulted Grace to superstardom. She said about him, quote, "Mr. Hitchcock taught me everything about cinema. It was thanks to him that I understood that murder scenes should be shot like love scenes and love scenes like murder scenes," end quote. Let's jump back into Grace's love life. After the success of Rear Window, Grace co-starred with newly widowed Bing Crosby in The Country Girl. As the pattern continued, Grace formed a little crush on her older co-star. I don't blame her here either. He's always been one of my favorites. But I think I have read he's not super nice, so we'll dig into him another time. Anyways, unlike Clark Gable, 51-year-old Bing Crosby did not reject Grace's advances, and a relationship quickly began. In fact, Bing was so into the idea of a relationship with Grace that he proposed marriage soon after they began dating. Remember, he was just widowed too. However, Grace was not quite ready to become someone's wife, and the relationship ultimately ended. Something positive did come out of her film with Bing Crosby, though, an Academy Award and a Golden Globe. Her next film would be her final of Alfred Hitchcock's films, bringing her and her new boyfriend, famed fashion designer Oleg Cassini, to the south of France for filming. Now, those of you who know anything about Grace Kelly's story can see where this is going. As she was being driven through Monaco, she laid eyes on the beautiful palace of Prince Grimaldi for the first time and was awestruck. And that wouldn't be the last time she saw that palace, not by a long shot. When 25-year-old Grace and her boyfriend Oleg, who she was now getting quite serious with, returned to the States, she decided to bring him to her family home for the weekend. She hoped for a much better outcome than when she had brought Don Richardson there years prior, but she was not so lucky. Oleg is quoted as saying, quote, "The weekend I spent with Grace's family was the worst in my life. I ate razor blades there for breakfast. Nobody would talk to me except Grace's sisters. Grace's father positively refused to talk to me. He mumbled something to the effect that there was no communication possible between us ever," end quote. Ouch, they sound fun. Grace returned to France and Monaco in May of 1955 for the Cannes Film Festival. And that's where, on May 6, 1955, she officially met Prince Rainier, the heir to the Kingdom of Monaco, and they immediately felt a connection. They soon entered into a long-distance relationship. Now comes what has historically been the hardest part of relationships for Grace, the meeting of the parents. In this case, the prince actually had members of his court send out feelers to Grace's family before actually meeting them. Apparently, the Kellys were on their best behavior because a meeting was planned for Christmas Day, 1955. And guess what? Grace's parents actually liked him. It took an actual prince to be good enough for their daughter. Yikes. After the Christmas visit, Prince Rainier traveled to Hollywood to join Grace on the set of what would become her last film, High Society. Now, this is the first film I ever saw Grace Kelly in. I love this movie. Of course, I was initially drawn to it because of her co-stars, hotties Bing Crosby and Frank Sinatra. But I truly enjoy this movie. Soon, Grace was engaged to the Prince of Monaco, but being engaged to the Prince of Monaco isn't the same as being engaged to Joe Schmo off the street. Grace had to pass a series of fertility tests to ensure she was able to provide an heir to the monarchy. And her father was required to pay a dowry. Jack Kelly was enraged by this and suddenly didn't love the prince so much. He reluctantly agreed, and the wedding of the century was planned. The parental drama wasn't over yet, though. As the hype of the wedding grew, Grace's mother, Margaret, did tell-all interviews with various reporters, spilling all the dirty details she could about Grace's past relationships. Can you believe it? What a monster. Grace had 4 years remaining on her contract with MGM. She came to a deal with them to get out of it early on the condition that MGM would have exclusive rights to filming her wedding. This was huge for them. Grace Kelly and Prince Rainier of Monaco were married on April 19, 1956, and 30 million people watched from their television screens at home. After their 7-week honeymoon, that sounds amazing, and life began to settle into normal royal life, Grace quickly realized it was a lonesome life. The prince tried to remedy this for his new bride by appointing her a lady-in-waiting who would also try to teach her how to speak French, but that was not successful, so Grace felt very isolated. It didn't take long for a potential royal heir to show up in Princess Grace's belly. Grace was pregnant within several weeks of the wedding. On January 23, 1957, Princess Grace gave birth to a, drumroll, baby girl. A happy occasion indeed, but everyone was secretly hoping for a baby boy who would become the heir to the throne. Grace was pregnant again only 5 months after baby Caroline was born, and this time the kingdom rejoiced on March 14, 1958, at the birth of a baby boy named Prince Albert, the future heir to the throne. Their final child, Stephanie, was not born until February 1, 1965. Grace was a very hands-on mother. She wanted to be the primary caretaker for her children and wanted them to grow up as normal as possible. It was important to her that they acted like normal society children and not like snobby royalty. Grace took her role as mother very seriously, and from what it sounds like, she did an amazing job at it. Unfortunately, this story isn't quite the fairy tale we hoped it would be for Princess Grace. In September of 1982, Grace and her youngest daughter, 17-year-old Stephanie, were driving home to the palace from their vacation home. Grace, behind the wheel, suddenly suffered a stroke. The instant impairment caused her to lose control of the vehicle and veered off a 45-foot embankment of the mountainous road that they were driving on. Stephanie, thankfully, was mostly unharmed, physically at least. Princess Grace, unfortunately, suffered severe injuries. Movie star Grace Kelly, Princess Grace of Monaco, died the next day on September 14, 1982, at the devastatingly young age of 52. A tragic ending, not unlike something you would see on the big screen, to a film and royal legend. I would like to share some interesting facts about Grace Kelly that I learned during my research. Bullet point number 1. A designer from MGM Studios made Grace Kelly's wedding gown. It contained 25 yards of silk taffeta, 100 yards of silk net, 125-year-old lace that they acquired from a museum, and the veil contained thousands of tiny beads. This dress truly is beautiful. It's stunning. Bullet point number 2. Both Grace's father and brother were Olympic gold medal rowers. That's pretty impressive. Bullet point number 3. Grace purchased her ancestral home in Ireland in 1973 after retracing her family heritage back to it. In conclusion, Grace Kelly was a little girl with big dreams who became what many girls dream of, a real-life princess. She was held down by her difficult parents, but had the strength to overpower their criticisms and chase her dreams of becoming an actress. It's a tragedy her life was cut so short. Thank you, Grace Kelly, for showing us that hard work and determination can help us achieve our dreams. And thank you all for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review where you listen to your podcasts, and follow the show on Facebook and Instagram. Until next time, Goldies. For this episode, I got most of my information from a book titled Grace Kelly, A Life from Beginning to End, part of the Hourly History series. I also used information from Britannica.com, Biography.com, and IMDB.